Good afternoon to everyone, and good morning for those who just joined us from other countries and continents. I want to welcome everybody. My name is Kate, and I will moderate this session. I want to welcome you to the quiz and day conference today, and we are very excited about this session coming up. So hope you too. We would like you to have a useful experience here, and we are doing everything possible for that. So I would like to introduce our speakers, Patrick Pauling and Sanjit Patel. But before this, I would like to tell you a few very interesting facts about each of them. For example, facts about Sanjit. He realized that his passion for bridged the technical side with the business side. And Sanjit used this passion to help multiple companies double size revenue. Also, Sanjit works with the clients and businesses partners to improve their IP testing. Also, Sanjit is an avid traveler and seeks to check off only 2 more continents from his travel list. So, Sanjit, can you tell us what is the continents in your travel list?
Yeah, the only 2 continents I have left are Australia and Antarctica.
Okay, any particular countries in it?
No, I visited a lot of countries in Asia, in South America, not a lot in the eastern part of Europe, so probably that.
Okay, and also very interesting fact about you that your passion is music and you enjoy playing clarinet and viola. Do you have a free time, enough free time doing this?
Not so much. When we first started stay at home, I started playing a lot more again, but now I'm a little busy.
Any concert maybe you participate in?
Not for a long time.
I see. Thank you. So I would like to tell you about Patrick. Patrick moved to New York 10 years ago to continue his career in IT, and he prepared the first mobile website for over 75 major brands such as Target, Matt Cosmetics, and Tesco. He lives in New York and no hobbies because his apartment is no longer than his profile and in LinkedIn. So you can see. I have only one question, Patrick. Why you are not trying to find hobby out of your apartment?
I did, but living in Manhattan, everything's so expensive. So even if I was knitting, it would still cost me $1,000 a day or something. It's New York City life.
Okay. I hope you like to live in New York.
Yeah. No, I've been here now. I should update that profile. I've been here now about 14 years.
Oh, great. I see. And one more question. Maybe you can name mobile website of the company you're especially proud of.
Sure. I think one of the best ones we had was the ones that look best are probably MAC Cosmetics and ASOS. Those are two. And then I think in terms of like impact, the Tesco one was interesting because it's such a large, it's like the largest brand that we worked with, and we went to one of their technology headquarters, and we were helping them set up their first kiosks. So it was, the Tesco one was technically the most interesting. Graphically, MAC Cosmetics and ASOS are the best looking ones.
Okay, thank you very much. Before you start, I would like to give two important facts and information about our session. So after the presentation, we will start our Q&A session, and everybody can send questions in the chat section. So question will be announced after the presentation. And also very important part that I will ask everybody closely following the presentation, because during the presentation will be appeared secret words, and your task will be to catch all the words, to collect phrase, and send your answers in the chat. So guys, the floor is yours and you're welcome. Patrick, I know that you will be the first.
Yep, thanks so much, I appreciate it. All right, let me open this up and share that. Is that looking good, Sanjeet?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So I'm Patrick Poulin. I was the, there it is. Myself and my co-founder, Simone Pisano, started API Fortress about 5 years ago. And last December, API Fortress became part of the Sauce Labs team. And so what's been really exciting is, as you know, Sauce Labs really is sort of a leader in website and mobile testing, and they wanted to start extending to the API space. So by partnering with us, we're able to bring that in. And we actually just a month ago launched a completely solidified and integrated API testing experience within Sauce Labs. So if you log into Sauce Labs, you go to the left side, you'll see it says like API testing, and it has a red button that says new. And so that's what we've been working on. And so what's been unique about the API Fortress journey is that we didn't start from a program and try to become cloud. We started cloud first, and now we've been building like programs and tooling around it. So we have that unique experience of trying to maximize collaboration and automation due to that experience in the cloud first perspective. Just a couple fun facts about APIs that I don't think enough people know about. It's Akamai, one of the big like CDN networks. They said 83% of all web traffic is coming in through APIs. Like APIs are really running the show these days. As much as we view them as like a newer technology, the volume is there. It is where everything is running. And so the fact that API testing hasn't matured as rapidly as website and mobile app testing has always sort of fascinated us. And that's why we've been working on this problem for 5 years, because you look at the marketplace for API testing and it's still almost just the same three people. It's like us, Postman, and SmartBear. So it's an interesting time now that the traffic is clearly caught up with the hype. It's not just hype, like the numbers are there. And the other item that we find really interesting, and so it's not the purpose of this discussion. The purpose of this discussion is for Sanjeet to show you how to go from a spec file to like a full suite of API tests in just a couple minutes. So very practical. But just from a high level, something that we think is always sort of underrated is when people talk about like security issues in APIs, 95% of them are actually like a functional error or the customer's like fault. They just didn't set something up correctly. And a lot of that can be caught testing. So the thing with testing APIs, APIs aren't just up or down, they're constantly evolving. And furthermore, if you don't give a really substantial amount of testing to it, that is one of the strongest entry points for people looking to come in. Actually, I forgot to show that slide. So yeah, 83% web traffic, 95% security issues. And so actually on our website, apifortress.com, we have a blog, and we actually wrote about three of the bigger vulnerabilities and how specifically, like if they had done some proper testing, especially functional testing, and maybe even some, production monitoring, they would have caught these issues before they happened. And they are obviously huge issues. So I'm not going to go into detail, too much detail, but they're available here in the deck, and I'm sure the deck will be shared later, but they're also like fully written up on our blog. But again, just functional testing would have stopped huge security vulnerabilities by the Indian government, by the United States Postal Service, and by Twitter. So for us, for me, like the thing I really like to talk about before Sanjeet gets into it is, what do we view as continuous quality? And it's a little unique because of our platform first play. So obviously there's functional testing, but then on top of that, and something that we don't see done enough, is actual integration testing. And so what we mean by that is, search, add to cart, checkout, recreating an entire user flow as a single test without it being specifically A to B to C. It's something we just don't see done enough. Like, we've seen people that'll create a series of functional tests, one for search, one for add to cart, then they'll run it in order, but that isn't really reproducing a user flow. And a lot of issues still get sneak through the cracks. And so that's something we really push for when it comes to like using the platform. And then the other parts for us are using those functional integration tests and using them obviously as part of your CI, just automate it, however you want to automate it. Often people use CI, but then also performance testing. There's not enough performance testing done at the API level, we find. And so like, that's one of the advantages of when we started more cloud first. We're able to have things like load testing available like right away. And then this final piece is, I feel like the first two guys, everyone here is a practitioner and knows how it works. But the final one here is, I think, the one that we push the most, because it's the one we find the greatest weakness in, which is actual like monitoring, so production monitoring. So because we're a cloud platform, it's really easy for us to you just pick a functional test and you schedule it to run as a monitor. That's fairly straightforward. But for us, what we're finding more and more is that it's such an easy thing to do. It doesn't mess up your analytics much at all. And it gives you that final level of security to know for a fact that your APIs are running correctly. Because when APIs are running on staging, that's fine. But the minute live customer data is involved, we find that often the customer data is what might lead to a break in the system. And that's where this using your existing tests as monitors is absolutely imperative for that. And so that's something that we always push for more and more when our customers are asking us for like, hey, what is some advice, since we've been doing it for so long, about like API testing? And for us, it's like, obviously there's the integration testing, there's performance testing, automation, but like production monitoring, not enough people are doing it. And it's a lot more important than you could ever realize. And so in a minute, we'll have Sanjeet show us exactly how to do it. But just as sort of a high level of what we're looking to talk about here is starting with spec files. So spec files are becoming more and more popular. The biggest ones right now are Swagger, the Open API, and Postman collections. So starting with one of those spec files, you can immediately kick off a series of like test creation and automation that absolutely like sets you up for like much greater success. So now that we're a very much API economy with the 83% traffic based on what Akamai said, we should be designing it. And when it comes to design, you want to start with that spec file. And so with that in mind, Sanjeet, are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will let Sanjeet take it over.
Awesome. Yeah, let me start sharing my screen. Great. Are you seeing?
Yep. Perfect.
So yeah, like Patrick mentioned, kind of the workflow I'm going to take here is importing a spec file, taking one of the calls from that spec file, generating a test from there, and then from that test, creating a schedule or a monitor. And then I'll even show you a little bit about running that test using our command line tool so that you could run it in a build pipeline or any other sort of automation framework that you might want to execute that test from. And then at the end, we'll save some time to show you kind of a sneak peek to our new mocking tool, which also uses spec files. And so kind of tying it all together with that kind of importance of the spec file. So I'm going to go into this project here. I'm going to jump over into our HTTP client. And what I'm going to do is click on this import OpenAPI/Postman button. I'm going to choose a OpenAPI 3 spec file that I have here. And I'm going to import that into, let's create a new folder. I'm going to import that into this pet store folder. And okay, it's already done. And so if we go into this folder, you'll see that it actually imported all of the calls that were in that spec file. And it has parameterized certain parts of it and kind of organized it by the call type and things like that. So from here, once you have that all set up, I'm going to actually pull up a endpoint that I've already kind of added some parameters to. And when I hit send, you can see the full response that comes back. So generating a test from here is really easy. There's a button on the side. You click generate test, give it a name. And if we wanted to give it a description and some sort of tag. So tags are very useful for organizing your tests, not only in the dashboard, but when you want to execute them, you can actually execute a number of tests by their tags. If you have 4 or 5 tests with the same tag, you can execute all of those tests by giving that tag ID. So something like pet. And then once I hit save, it's going to auto-generate this test for me. And what the platform does is it looked at the call that we made, the full response that came back, including the header and the status and all of that. And it's going to generate this test for me. And what the generated test looks like is it puts the call at the top, and it will automatically parameterize the protocol domain and endpoint, as well as the parameters. So you can see that this status parameter has been variabilized to status. And if we actually jump over to the input side, we can see that the values for those variables, so the protocol, domain, endpoint, and even that status variable available. And then the platform is going to go through and create assertions. And it's going to say, okay, so I noticed that the API responds with the header content type application JSON. So I'm going to validate that. I also noticed that the entire response is an array. So I'm going to validate that it returns an array. And then I'm going to loop through that array and validate all of the objects inside of there. And by validating, what I mean is it's not only going to check out those objects exist, but it's going to try to validate what type they're returning. So ID should return an integer type. Things like the URL must return a valid URL. Status must exist. So the status object doesn't necessarily have to return any specific type, but it should return something. And so once we have this test generated, we can actually run it, just so we can take a look at the test report that's generated every time. So if I open this report, whenever you execute a test in the platform, you get a test report like this, whether it is manually run like I just ran it or automated, scheduled. A report like this is always generated and stored in the platform. So what the report tells you is, first it'll just give you some metadata, like it passed, when it ran, how long it took. And then it will show you the full details of the test itself. So the call being made, all of the assertions being validated, the root payload is where it's actually looping through. And so you can see all of the assertions being validated here all the way through the entire response of the API. So we imported a spec file and we generated a test. Now what do? Right? So from here, we're going to schedule this test and run it as a monitor. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and publish this test. Now that I have it published, I can pop over into the schedule tab. And I can create a new schedule. And so we can call this monitor pet status. Now, the way the scheduling functionality works in the platform is that it is based on the frequency, right? So how frequently do you want this test to run? By default, the default schedule is every 5 minutes of every hour of every day of every month. If you didn't want to run it every 5 minutes, but only on the 10-minute marks, you can select those, and now it'll only run every 10 minutes. You could say, I only want it to run in the beginning of the month, the middle of the month, and the end of the month, something like that. You can also choose specific months if you wanted to. So, you know, a lot of options here. And once you are done, you hit save. And now that schedule is going to execute based on that parameters we gave. And all of those results will automatically show up in the dashboard, which I'm actually going to go into a different dashboard because we just created that schedule. So there's not going to be anything in there. But if we jump over to the dashboard, what we're going to see is first we're going to see the logs view. The logs view will show you all of the tests that are being executed. So we can see how many events we've had. And by events, we mean how many API calls have been made during your test executions, how many of those were successful, how many of those failed. And then at the bottom here, we can see all of the tests that are being executed. We can see this one here failed, and I can actually see the test report for that failed test that we have, and I can kind of scroll through and see where it failed, and we can see this actually is not returning an ID. And so things like that. We do store the full test report for all test executions that have occurred, and you can always go through and filter by date or by tag or anything like that in the dashboard. The other part of the dashboard will show you the metrics. Now, the metrics are all about the APIs that have been called in your test. And you can see for each API that's being called, you can see the method, the status, as well as the latency and fetch times. And so this is kind of a really, especially for a monitor, right? This is a good way of coming in here, keeping a track of your APIs and their metrics, right? Is the latency time increasing or decreasing, or is it staying consistent? Like for instance, my latest 2 calls were latency around 250, 260. But the time before that, it was running at 450. So the test didn't necessarily fail, but something wasn't right? It took almost twice as long for this API to make the request. So things like that are where the dashboard is very useful. So we've seen importing a spec file, generating the test, scheduling, and then where those tests data is stored. From there, another thing that's really important is being able to run these tests as part of your CI pipeline, right? So if you're pushing a new build, you want to execute your regression tests for UI as well as API. And so the way API Fortress does it is we allow you to generate what's called a webhook. This webhook allows you to do a number of things in the platform. It allows you to update tests, execute tests, pull test result data. A lot of kind of functionality that you can do in the tool can also be done via the API webhooks. And so once you do have that webhook generated, what you can actually do is part of your pipeline, you can use our command line tool, API-FCTL, and run it with some parameters. And so what I'm doing here is I'm actually running this tool, our command line tool. I'm passing it in my webhook, which is what we generated here, with some of my parameters that I need to log in, my sauce username and my sauce access key. And then from here, I'm actually telling it to run a single test, and I'm giving it the ID of the test. That ID can be found either in the URL of the test or within the test details. And so that's how you execute a single test. If you wanted to run this by tag, what you would do is instead of the -I and the ID, you would do -T and put a tag. So earlier we tagged our test with pet. So if I wanted to run all tests with pet, I would do -T pet. But let's go ahead and execute this test. And it might take a second. There we go. And so we can see this test was now executed. Here's the test ID. Here's that task ID that we executed the test from. And now what we are going to look at is actually not in this project. It is in this project, I believe. Yes, so we executed that test in this project, and we can actually see this one right here at 8:23 in the morning, integration test. And we can go into here and we can see this test that was executed against. And so the kind of the benefits of having a platform like API Fortress that's hosted for you is that when you are executing tests outside of the tool, you can have the data returned into your pipeline as well, asynchronously, or you can have, or not or, but at the same time, we're also storing that data in the platform. So that dashboard is always being updated. You can always go into here and get an idea of how your tests are executing or what the results are right from a single dashboard. So kind of we talked about the importance and the usefulness of spec files, right? So importing spec files so that you can then make the calls, generate the tests, schedule them, monitor them, all of that. So this kind of leads us to our new thinking on API mocking, right? So API Fortress has a mocking functionality that we have had for years now. And it was, you could either capture those APIs using a micro gateway, or you could build the APIs kind of by hand. And so what we've come up with now is that because the spec files are very important, and because those kind of are your single point of truths when you're building APIs, why not generate mocks directly from the spec files, right? So if we look at, let's look at this. So I have a spec file here that has a few endpoints defined. So we can see the URL and then the release notes path that returns or that requires a name or an integer type. Here's what the response looks like. And then we have a user endpoint and a few other endpoints. So I have this spec file here, and I'm going to import that into our mocking tool. And so the first thing I'm going to do is load that up. And so here is another sort of tool of ours. It's our new, it's still in beta. It is for mocking and a ton of other features, like it does contract testing and logging functionality and all of that. But what we're going to focus on here is taking that spec file that we looked at and importing it and generating mocks from there. So I'm going to use our tool to run, pass in the spec file, myspec.yaml, and I'm going to give it a port number. And so if I execute this, what we'll see is that it's going to start generating and creating mocks on my localhost based on that spec file. And so we can see these few endpoints that have been mocked out. And so from here, I can make a request to one of these. So let's say, let's get the first one. So and and let's get the release notes endpoint. And so if I call the release notes endpoint, we can see that it is sending me this information back. And that's all based on this spec file and how it has it defined, right? So all of that is being passed back from that. And so we can make a call to a few of the other ones. Let's see. Let's do maybe this. Yeah, let's do this one where we're going to get user details on this user drawbar. And so I'm going to authenticate myself, call my mocked endpoint, and grab details on this user here. So if I call that, we can see that it returns the details, the email, the name, the username. And the cool thing here with these mocks is standard spec files have certain fields that kind of have to be in there, right? So things like description or schema, references, all of that. And so what we've done here is we've actually added the option for you to build in extra additional pieces here that normal spec will ignore, right? So if you were to take the spec file, import it into API Fortress, or even import it into Swagger Hub or Swagger Editor, it will think this is a completely valid spec file. It's not going to complain about it. It will work just fine. But when you import this into our mocking tool, what our mocking tool is going to do is it's going to look at some of these external pieces that we've added here, and it's going to take that in and create things. So there are these external values, that these samples that we have, and we can take a look at what that means. And so we have one, for example, for this user one. And so if I open that up, you can see that I've defined a response in here for all of our users. And then if we look at the echo one, so the echo one is very interesting. The echo endpoint is going to give you back the some details, right? Request headers, request body, IP address, URL. But the interesting thing here is that these are not defined by us. We're actually telling the tool to create that or find that. So you can actually define variables and dynamically generate data in the mocks as well. And so some real powerful stuff that can be done with this mocking tool. And this is kind of just the stage one. Right now, it is just a local tool. The idea from here is to have this be that you can host it anywhere. You can host it. We can have it put up somewhere. These mocks are fully available from anywhere that has access to where the mocks are created. And then, like I mentioned, there's a ton of things that we're hoping to do and building out at the moment, which is things like, well, contract testing is already available. There's another endpoint that we can do that will capture and validate the request. So if I actually make my call with this -- validate request, what that's going to do is actually, when I'm calling my endpoints, it's going to not only get the response, but it's actually going to validate the contract, right? The request being made and the response being returned. So both sides of the conversation. A logging functionality that will eventually be added, allowing you to log and capture API requests that are being made, and pass them into API Fortress so that you can generate tests from there or use them as part of your integration testing or anything like that. And so just to kind of recap really quickly, what we saw here was kind of, like Patrick said, that importance on spec files is something we've noticed in the industry, and then everyone is really migrating and shifting towards starting with specs first, building proper API documentation so that everything down the line is clean. And so what we've done is given you the ability to import those spec files, generate tests from there, generate or create schedules and monitors, have a dashboard, and then also use that same exact spec file to then generate mocks and mocked endpoints for testing purposes, for third-party uses. There's a ton of functionality available for you to use those mocks. And so that is sort of all I had planned to show. I think from here we will do a Q&A session.
I'm going to show 2 more slides and then we'll call.
Okay.
We'll do the QA session. So
cool.
Let me share real quick.
Thank you very much, guys. It was very useful, and we have few questions. First of all, people ask to send a platform URL to share. Second one, why using mocking word in the beginning of CMD running Docker?
Why using the mocking?
I think you're asking why
the beginning of CMD running Docker.
Yeah, that's actually just the directory that I'm in. It's not the part of the call. The call starts with Docker run.
Okay. Also, we have another kind of question, like how much it costs.
Right now, API Fortress, if you go to saucelabs.com, create an account, you can do API testing for free. So right now, it's a total free preview. That's going to keep going for another probably month or two, and then we're going to start putting pricing plans around it, but we don't have any plans right now. So right now it's completely free and unlimited because we just released it and we're looking to get like some feedback and some data. So it's totally free. Check it out. You get everything.
Oh, good news. Good news.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, we have one more question. Can we parameterize test data with Excel DB while generating the test?
Yeah, so not while generating the test, but once you have the test generated and created, we do have the ability to pull in structured data files like Excel, CSV, and data drive your test from there. Connections to databases is something we've always had, and I believe is coming to the new platform. I'm not sure if it's there yet, but databases and Excel files and structured data will be available so that you can data drive your tests.
Okay. Pro and cons between Postman plus Jenkins versus your solution.
Our solution versus Postman, well, the generate test is the first big differentiator you'll see. So we're actually like generating that test for you. So right out of the gate, you have that advantage. The other advantage is that our platform soon will have load testing, which we have already in our previous version, but in the new one, we're still finalizing feature parity. And just generally in terms of like the test creation process, the API Fortress platform was built just for testing. Postman does a little bit of everything, but with us, like when you run a test, you get a really detailed report, you get a dashboard, you get reporting. We have a completely on-prem solution. So the thing with Postman is if you're using the collaboration parts, those are all going into their Postman Cloud, which is problematic for a lot of people with more security needs. So we can give you an entire API Fortress instance that's on-prem and like more secured. Also, when you're writing a test, we can create tests that are much more capable of reproducing user flows like search, add to cart, checkout, while Postman tests are contained within each individual call. So that alone sort of undermines the full capability of the test itself. So do you have anything else?
Yeah, I think besides all of that, right, the Postman execution in Jenkins it requires you to use their tool like Newman, and then it adds another layer. And so it's not as simple as, yeah, take Postman Plus and then just run it in your Jenkins pipeline. It has that additional layer of using the runner. Whereas, with the webhook and the command line tool, it's very simple to just execute your tests, have those results even back into your CI pipeline, not have to go into the Postman Cloud and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, Postman's good. It's just Postman's goal isn't testing. They have it's an HTTP client that's added a lot of features since then. We're purely a testing platform, so that's been our focus. And so if you're really looking to take your testing seriously, you'll quickly see the differences between ourselves and Postman's testing tab.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe you guys want to ask something else?
There is a couple more slides actually I could show. Let me do that real quick.
Oh, great.
So we were talking about some of the suggestions we have when it comes to creating tests and like the suggestions for the tests themselves. And so the big ones for us, like these are some of the basic stuff. You test everything, so don't just like skip some endpoints, like test it all. The objects and the data. So validating, like not just that it's a float or an integer, but like what if it has a specific range? Like what if it's a price point? If it's a pair of socks, they're always priced between $2 and $30. Like you can add that level of intensity to the test and it'll help you catch some really big outliers. Monitoring in production, using your functional tests. We spoke to that. And the more interesting, like advanced ones for the people here is the variabilizing, pretty obvious. The business logic, so that part's interesting. That's when I was talking about like when socks are always between $2 and $30. Like testing should be more than just pure data. Like a professional QA should understand not just the specifics of what the spec says, but the intention of that object, for example. So having that knowledge allows you to actually create ranges. So that crazy things like, you know, when sometimes there's an airline ticket on sale for $1, like that's a fairly simple, like functional monitor you can build for production. And then you could make sure that like you catch that as early as possible. So you don't owe people a bunch of $1 airline tickets. The next one is dynamic data. We were talking about that at the end, using a database or a CSV. We really try to push against using things that are static, like a CSV, because again, we're an API testing platform, but we can make API calls. So when we connect to a database, we often like help you set up the database so that it's an API itself. So we make an API call to get data that we then use against that within that test. So it's connecting APIs together to really sort of variabilize it and make it dynamic, because we notice that when you're using static data and you're only testing against staging, that's when problems leak through that aren't caught for months. But once you're in production, you could be using some live data. You could actually like start catching the things you didn't think about before. End-to-end testing, that's to us, that means just recreating that user flow, which is one of the constraints within Postman. Although Postman Pro, you know, you could sort of chain them together, but in our platform, it's a lot more open, where it's more of a workbench, whereby you can create a whole user flow that has, hey, if it's a 201, go here. If it's a 401, go there. Go back to the beginning and start over if it's XYZ. So our platforms are really just made for like creating tests that can reproduce whole user flows. And the last one's pretty straightforward. You can actually look at the call itself and then check that the actual response matches it, which is one of the other security issues we actually, I think, write about, like the United States Postal Service. They let you search by wildcard than we're supposed to. And so that means that they just printed out everyone's data. And so that was a big miss. Like when you search by wildcard, you should know what it looks like. If you search for Patrick, you should only get Patrick. That's the sort of stuff you need to check within a test. More than just did it respond correctly is a big item. So that was it for that deck, actually. Just those are the last few items I just wanted to go through. Saucelabs.com is where the platform's at, and then on the left side you'll see a link to API testing. It's totally free. It's gonna be totally free for a little while, and we're still sort of working out like the pricing packages. But first, our goal first and foremost is to just get people to use it and give us feedback. The goal for us is just self-serve and just have it really start being used by the community, by actual practitioners. You know, sometimes like with the old platform, we sort of had it a little bit more of you buy the system, you get the system. We're changing that model as part of Sauce Labs, where we want to unlock it and we want people to always have it for free. Now there might come points where there might be like, well, at a certain amount of usage, like then we start talking about like maybe we should have a pricing plan. But the reality is we're always going to have a free tier. And so there's no reason not to start trying it out now and giving us back feedback. Like you'll even see, we call it a tech beta. And at the top, there's a link to like a Google form. So we're just looking to get more and more feedback to improve it, because we want to create as useful a free API testing tool as we possibly can. It's a position Sauce Labs and ourselves have always wanted to get into. And so that's thankfully what we're able to get into, get approvals, and that's what we're doing. That's it from my side.
Okay, thank you again. We also have one question.
Sure.
In case of CI integration, is it possible to view the test result directly in Jenkins logs?
Yeah, so you can have that execution be asynchronous, so it will wait for the execution and then pass the results back into Jenkins. For Jenkins, we do offer a JUnit format for the return. You can also get the response in JSON or a plain markdown text as well.
Okay, I also want to share one comment to you from Eva. He completely agreed that testing should explore not only technical points of view, but it should focus more on the business logic. And also Anthony agree, and So great work, great work.
Great, thanks.
So we have 2 minutes left for the last questions. You have time to ask our headliners about interesting questions. So waiting.
One thing that I do want to say is that like spec files are not perfect. Like they don't nearly say enough for you to have a really perfect test that we generate off of it. And that's just a limitation of the spec file. Like Swagger and OpenAPI are okay. The Postman collection really doesn't tell you much at all. That's the harder one for us to get a useful test generated from. So don't assume that this is just, it's done. The goal of our generate test is to get you working on the interesting stuff as soon as possible and not spending your time on just the basic setup. We give you that framework of the functional test, and from there is when the work and the actual art of the whole thing actually kicks in, where you talk about, as you know, as that person just said, you know, business logic, actually creating an end-to-end user test. Like that's not something the platform can generate right now, an end-to-end user test, because you need to understand what APIs connect to which. And that's not something that comes in the spec file itself. So that search, add to cart, checkout, that might all be in the spec file, but only you can really connect them and make it really represent what a normal user flow would be.
One more question. Any plan to enhance to the tool to support behavior-driven development?
Yeah, we do support a little bit of BDD frameworks. There's a couple docs that we have out there on how you could use the two together. I'm not sure if we have any plans to actually have behavior-driven development within the tool itself, but we do plug well into like Cucumber and Eggplant and the ones that are already out there.
Thank you, thank you. So great work, great work. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. I just reading our chat. So guys, if we will have a question list, we will send it to you and ask to give us maybe a few answers, very short, that we can share with our audience. So thank you very much for this significant work, for your time, and I hope that everybody find this job very useful and can find something very important for themselves. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Guys, sorry. One more question.
Sure.
Does the tool support our data sterilization framework as well, apart from GSON? GSON.
I don't know what that one means.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
What was the first part again?
Yeah, could you repeat that question?
Does the tool supports AVRO data serialization framework as well, apart from GSON?
Gotcha. Not at the moment. The two supported is JSON and XML.
Yes, right now I think we're done.
Yep.
So thank you guys again.
Sure.
Wish you a great day.
Okay.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.